following is a recording of a presentation given on November 30th, 2023 to the public regarding the Town of Windham's draft zoning regulations. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Helen Budrock. I am a community planner with Delaware Engineering. Delaware Engineering is a full-service engineering firm specializing in municipal planning and infrastructure. Delaware Engineering has a long-standing relationship with the Town of Windham and has served as the town's engineer for over 20 years. Our approach is that we view infrastructure within the larger context of community development and from a functional perspective as it relates to land use and development. We've been involved in updating the town's comprehensive plan since 2021, and we currently review development plans on behalf of the Windham Planning Board. So how did we get here? The town applied for and received a Smart Growth Grant to update its comprehensive plan in 2019. What is a comprehensive plan? It's a document that summarizes the town's goals for the future. The comp plan forms the foundation for all the local laws regulating specifically land use, and it's a guide for future growth and development in the town. After receiving the grant in 2020, a comprehensive plan committee was formed. In 2021, about a year and a half later, the draft comprehensive plan was completed, and finally, in early 2022, the final comprehensive plan was adopted by the town board. Shortly thereafter, the town board formed an implementation committee to start working on some of the land use recommendations in the comprehensive plan. The number one recommendation was to look at adopting the town's first ever zoning code. That is a long process, so the town applied for another Smart Growth Grant to work on the zoning while they worked on updating some of the other local land use regulations, including the noise law, the setback laws, and the site plan law. So in the early part of this year, the setback and the site plan law revisions were adopted. We heard that the Smart Growth Grant had been awarded, and a zoning commission was then formed to start working on the zoning law. We're still in the process of finalizing the grant contract, but we're now in November of 2023. The Zoning Commission has been working for the past couple of months on the foundation for what will become, hopefully, the Town of Windham's first zoning code. So what actually is zoning? New York State law authorizes towns to enact zoning regulations for the purpose of promoting the health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. Generally speaking, zoning is a tool that is commonly used by municipalities to regulate the built environment. It's a type of land use law that establishes different zones or districts with specific regulations governing the type and intensity of future development that can take place on each parcel of land in a specified district. Now, most communities in New York State have had zoning laws in place for decades. Most rural communities adopted zoning in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but some communities have resisted adopting zoning due to concerns over private property rights and government overreach. As I stated before, the 2022 Comprehensive Plan recommended updating the town's existing land use laws that were already in place and also forming a zoning commission to begin drafting the town's first zoning law. It's important to realize that just because Windham doesn't currently have a zoning law, that doesn't mean that development is unchecked or unregulated. The town actually has several land use laws that are designed to regulate the built environment, which are all still in effect. Those include an architectural review law that was passed in 1988, followed by a site plan review law, a subdivision law, a setback law, a wellhead protection law, and finally a sign law. The site plan review law, the setback law, and some other of those regulations were updated in 2023 following the adoption of the comprehensive plan. If zoning is adopted, many of these existing laws, the ones that are in red, will actually no longer be necessary because they'll be incorporated into the new zoning law. So what actually goes into a typical zoning law? There are actually different types of zoning, but the most common type is called Euclidean zoning, and that is the type that we're proposing here for Windham. In a very general sense, a typical zoning law can be separated into four major parts. The most important and the foundation of the zoning law is the zoning map, the schedule of uses, and the area regulations. That sets forth what districts are located where in the town, what uses are allowed in each district, and what bulk regulations are also allowed within each district. Things like lot area, height, density, setbacks, etc. The next section is regulations that apply to all districts. Those are things like architectural design, lighting, landscaping, signage, parking. So regardless of the use, these are things that would apply to all uses within all districts. The next section, section C in the chart, is regulations that apply only to certain uses. So certain uses like cell towers, emergency shelters, outdoor sales, sidewalk cafes, specific uses that may have specific regulations only applied to them are contained in this section. And then finally, administration and enforcement. There are various legal regulations that need to be included within the zoning code that govern things like the composition of the planning board, formation of a zoning board of appeals, how the zoning code is enforced, and how it would be amended in the future. So here we have a draft table of contents showing what would be included in Windham's zoning law. This is what the Zoning Commission has been using as sort of a working document to guide their discussions. And up until this point, the Zoning Commission has been really focusing on that first part of the zoning code, the foundation, which is the zoning map, the use regulations, and the area and height regulations. And I'll get into those in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. The second section that we talked about before, the supplemental regulations applicable to all districts, or here, and then you have the supplemental regulations applicable to certain uses, which we've been using as sort of a placeholder for things like accessory dwelling units, transient lodging, campgrounds, solar farms, cell towers, etc. Then we have the final section of the zoning code, which, as I said before, deals with some of the administration, how site plans are reviewed by the planning board, administration and enforcement, the composition and duties of the Zoning Board of Appeals and the Planning Board, and then adoption of amendments. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time walking you through the draft zoning map that the Zoning Commission has been working on for the past couple of months. This is the foundation from which everything will sort of flow from this point on, so it's important that we get feedback from the public at an early stage on the preliminary zoning map. This is not written in stone. This is very much just a beginning point for conversation. So what we have done is we've divided the town of Windham into essentially 4 different zoning districts, starting with the rural residential district, which is the light yellow. That encompasses most of the town, most of the outlying areas that are currently lower density in nature currently. The allowable uses that would be in that zoning district would be predominantly single-family residential uses. There would be some limited commercial uses allowed by special permit, particularly to accommodate any existing businesses that might exist in those sort of outlying rural residential areas. Next, we have the Hamlet residential area, which is in that light orange color. That is sort of a moderate density residential area. So that's higher density residential, higher than rural residential, but not quite as dense as the business district. It also includes a wider range of residential uses, so not just single-family residential, but also two-family, townhouses, apartments, other types of residential uses, and also a wider range of commercial uses allowed, again, by special permit. One of the things to just be aware of is that even though it's Hamlet residential, in the name, again, there are quite a bit of wide range of commercial uses that would be permitted in this zoning district by special permit. Next, we have the B business district, sort of this dark red here. That would be the highest density residential that would be permitted. Predominantly commercial uses. It would be a mixture of residential and commercial uses that would be permitted. And there would be a broader range of commercial uses permitted as of right. And I'll explain what that means in a little bit. And then last but not least, we have this purple section here, which is resort development. That is most of the lands that are associated in and around the Windham Mountain Ski Resort. You would have high density residential like you currently have around the resort would be continued as an allowable use. The ski resort and commercial recreation uses would obviously continue to be permitted. And right now the use and area regulations and other standards are going to be developed on a parallel track with the planning board since there is an active plan under review by the planning board for Windham Mountain. And the zoning code will actually reference a master plan of development that's agreed upon once that project gets through the planning board review process. So this is an example of what the draft schedule of uses is going to look like. This particular schedule of uses focuses on residential, community, and typical accessory uses. The Zoning Commission has also developed a draft companion table for commercial uses as well. But for illustrative purposes, let's just go through some of how the table is structured. So along this side, you have all the different uses that would be listed on the table, and then across the top, you have the different zoning districts: rural residential, hamlet residential, business, and rural development. So for each use, in this case, single-family dwelling units, it lists whether or not it's permitted, which is listed with a P, whether it's permitted via special permit, which is an SP, or whether or not it's prohibited within that zoning district. So you can see in the rural residential district, single-family dwellings are permitted as of right, two-family dwellings would be permitted subject to issuance of a special permit, and three-family, four-family, multifamily, mixed-use, and townhouses are actually prohibited in that rural residential zone. It's also important to note that typically in a zoning code, any use that's not specifically listed in that table is assumed to be prohibited. And all of the uses that are listed along this left side of the table are actually going to be defined in detail. So let's just spend a minute talking about the difference between permitted and special permit uses. So permitted uses are generally considered to be allowed as of right. This is a legal term that's used to describe a proposed use that is presumed to be compatible with the area and would not be subject to any kind of discretionary approval by the planning board. Uses permitted by special permit would be subject to discretionary approval by the planning board based on site-specific circumstances. These uses typically require a public hearing prior to approval, and it allows the planning board to attach any special conditions that may be required to minimize impacts on neighboring properties. So special permit uses are still permitted uses. It just gives the planning board and the town a little bit more discretion to determine whether or not those uses would be applicable in a particular area based on site-specific conditions like locations and the nature of the surrounding area. So similar to the schedule of uses, this is the draft schedule of area regulations. This is what the Zoning Commission has been working on as a starting point for discussion in terms of things like density, heights, setbacks, etc. for different uses in each of the zoning districts. Now, some communities actually have separate bulk regulations for different uses, so different setbacks for and height requirements for retail versus residential versus, pharmacy versus animal hospital. But in this case, the Zoning Commission felt that it was important to keep it simple, and what they're proposing is just a simple schedule of use regulations that would apply to all uses in the specified districts. So, for example, within the rural residential district, the minimum lot area is proposed to be 5 acres. There is no public water and sewer in the rural residential area, so that wouldn't apply. And then as you get into each of the other districts, the minimum lot area would become smaller. So for example, in the Hamlet Residential District, the minimum lot area would be 2 acres if you don't have access to public water and sewer, or a ½ acre if you do have access to those public utilities. Similarly, in the business district, the Zoning Commission is proposing that the minimum lot size be 1 acre if you don't have access to water and sewer. That's fairly standard because you need at least an acre to support a septic system and a well, or a ½ acre if you are connected to public utilities. Moving along to setbacks, different setbacks would be required. Those are the distance from the lot line that you would have a proposed building be set back from. So in this case, the front yard setbacks would be 75 feet in rural residential, 50 feet in Hamlet residential, and 25 feet in the business district. And then going across the board for the side and the rear yard setbacks, it would be 50 feet in the rural residential district, 30 feet in the Hamlet residential district, and 10 feet in the business district. Finally, the other requirements are things like minimum lot width, livable floor area, minimum height, and then lot coverage. So this is an example of what the Zoning Commission is proposing at the moment. As I stated before, in the Resort Development District, those area regulations are under development, and they'll actually be listed in a separate section of the zoning law specific to this zoning district and specific to the ski resort, and it'll be keyed into a master plan of development that's been agreed upon between the planning board and the developer, but we're not at that point yet. So I'd like to take a minute to go through some frequently asked questions that I'm sure you have in your mind at the moment. The first of which is, how will site plan applications and new development proposals be handled in the meantime? It's important to remember that nothing will change until a zoning law is formally adopted by the town board. We're at least 6 months to a year away from having something in final form for the town board to react to. So any plans for new development or expansion of existing uses will continue to be reviewed by the planning board under the land use regulations that are currently in place. As a reminder, under the existing laws that are currently in place, any commercial development, multifamily residential development, or single-family homes on parcels under 2 acres of size or greater than 3,500 gross square feet of floor area currently need planning board approval. So make sure that if you have plans for development, that you are adhering to those existing laws that are currently in place. The second question that you probably have in your mind is that, what if my property doesn't conform to the proposed zoning? That is very common. Zoning regulations will only impact new development going forward after the date of adoption. So it really has more to do with future development on vacant land than it does with existing development of a house or a business that has been in Windham for 50 years or more. So once a zoning law is adopted, if there are any uses, lots, or buildings that don't conform to the new regulations, they'll essentially be grandfathered and allowed to continue within certain parameters. So that doesn't mean that they won't be subject to the new zoning regulations. It just doesn't mean that it means that they won't have to go backwards. So if you have a house on a parcel that is under 2 acres of size in the Hamlet residential district and you're not connected to water and sewer, that doesn't mean that anything is going to happen to your property. It just means that you can't subdivide it any further because you don't have the minimum lot area requirement. There will be a section in the zoning regulations that will explain how what's called pre-existing non-conforming uses will be handled and under what circumstances they can be altered or enlarged. Typically, zoning laws contain provisions that allow pre-existing non-conforming buildings and uses to be expanded, to be renovated and changed over time within certain parameters. So if you think that your property or your building will not conform, to the zoning regulations as they currently stand once they're adopted by the town board. Don't worry, non-conforming uses are very common, and there are ways that they can be dealt with without any kind of hardship to the property owner. Lastly, what if I have plans to do something with my property that doesn't conform to the proposed zoning? Again, nothing will change until the zoning law is formally adopted by the town board. After adoption, state law requires that the town establish a zoning board of appeals, or ZBA, which is a separate board where property owners can go to seek relief from the zoning regulations and apply for one or more variances. A variance is a type of waiver a property owner can use to make changes to their land that would otherwise go against the zoning regulations. There are two types of variances, an area variance and a use variance. An area variance is fairly typical, not difficult to obtain, and that's, for example, if you have an undersized lot and you're looking to expand your house or your business and you can't meet the setback requirements because your lot is too small, you'd go to the ZBA for an area variance to have setbacks that are less than what would be required by the zoning code. Those are fairly typical, usually not a sort of an issue. Use variances are a different story. There are some specific legal requirements and tests that need to be met in order for the ZBA to grant a use variance, but there is a mechanism for which any property owner can go to the Zoning Board of Appeals and request a variance from the zoning code. So what happens next? The Zoning Commission is going to continue to meet monthly and work on fine-tuning the zoning map and the draft supplemental regulations. This is going to take some time. As I said before, it's probably a 6-month to a 1-year process. As the zoning board finishes sections of the draft zoning law, they'll be published on the wearewindham2040.com website. On that website, there is a tab called Zoning Info. And those sections of the zoning code will be published on that website as they're completed. Right now, on that website, there is a copy of the zoning map, the draft schedule of uses, and the draft schedule of area and height regulations. If you want to go there to get a little bit more detail on what's proposed. We will be putting up soon an interactive zoning map, where you can zoom in, take a look at your particular parcel, see what zoning district it's in. There will be some additional public information sessions in the future as needed as sections are developed. But once completed, the draft zoning law needs to be referred to the town board for review and discussion. They need to have at least 2 public hearings before it is adopted. And ultimately, the town board is the one that will make the final decision as to whether to adopt the draft zoning law presented by the Zoning Commission, and there is no strict time frame or deadline for adoption. So that concludes our presentation on the Town of Windham draft zoning law. Your feedback is important, so if you have questions or if you have feedback for us, please don't hesitate to contact me at any time. The preferred method of contact is via email. I can be reached at hbudrock@delawareengineering.com. I would encourage you to go to the wearewindham2040.com website, click on the zoning info icon. You'll be able to look at the zoning map, the schedule of uses, the area regulations, and there is a feedback form where you can provide detailed feedback that goes directly to me. So again, your feedback matters. We thank you for your time, and we'll keep you posted on updates as they are developed. Thank you.